Hello, BookTube. Michael K. Vaughan and I originally named our Wednesday comic book series uh, in honor of the fact that for a long time Wednesday has been the release date for new comics in the US. That's probably not going to stay universally true. The industry governing distribution operation called Diamond has gone out of business. And that's going to lead to a lot of chaos, probably to a lot of publishers shipping just independently on their own without a distributor, which means there could be many new comic book days throughout the week, or eventually some new comic book day could be settled on. But nevertheless, quite a few new comics show up every Wednesday at your LCS, your local comic shop. And as a lot of you have pointed out, Michael K. Vaughan and I don't talk about them because modern superhero comics from Marvel and DC are terrible. All the legacy characters have been swapped out for cheap substitutes that check boxes on the progressive stack. All the characters are gay, and all the characters spend every issue thinking about food, talking about food, and eating food. The current far left ideologues who run the superhero comic book industry, hate it. And it shows in the products that they make. So we don't get new issues. Neither one of us does. When I'm sure that at one point in his life, going to the comic shop on New Comic Book Day was a fairly staple thing. Certainly was for me. Whenever I was in the country, regardless of what the day of the week was, I always was there to see what was new, and usually come out with a pile of stuff. That's not true anymore, but nevertheless, the two superhero comic book companies don't only print their new gay, food-obsessed Twitter politics titles, they also reprint things. They have learned that reprints are a ticket to reliable money. The audience that they have intentionally driven out of the industry will still buy high-quality reprints of the stuff from when the comics were good. They'll still do that. Myself included. And also for today, for a little extra comic content, I wasn't going to do this, but Hannah at Hannah's Books really likes the comic book videos. So I thought I would add an extra comic book video today about two things that are in the comic shops today. Both of them reprints. Anything that I talk about that's in the comic shop today cannot be new, because the new stuff is awful. Just awful. The new stuff hates you and thinks your grandparents were horrible people. So there's no point in that, but both Marvel and DC had very interesting reprint volumes today. Marvel had this Star Wars #1 from 1977. This is the beginning of their comic book adaptation of this new movie that's in theaters called Star Wars. This has artwork by Howard Chaykin, the great Howard Chaykin. But clearly the creators of the book don't know anything about what they're doing. Look at what the the cover says. Luke Skywalker. Will he save the galaxy or destroy it? And that frog in the background is Darth Vader. He's just green. And the Death Star is back there, but it's glowing. You could tell this cover is not... I think this cover is entirely by Carmine Infantino and not by Howard Chaykin at all. But it wouldn't matter, because I doubt very much that the guys who put this comic together had seen the movie. And... you've even got a thumbnail up at the top there. That is Luke Skywalker. Marvel Comics design in the 70s had a little box that showed the character. And here you've got that little box up in the corner there, only it's Luke Skywalker drawn by John Romita. It's a very different look. I think, an oral history of this has yet to be written, but I think that a lot of people in the country were introduced to Star Wars by this comic book before they got a chance to see it. I think that might also be true for the George Lucas novel. I think a lot of people saw that book before they saw the movie. But the comic book, definitely. The comic book was everywhere. This was 1977. This was in every drugstore. It was everywhere. And it looks kind of interesting. It looks very science fictional. It doesn't look like anything Marvel Comics was doing at the time. So this is the beginning of that chapter, and it owes a lot to the book rather than to the movie. There's a lot of details in here that didn't make it into the movie cut that went into theaters. And it's early Howard Chaykin artwork. It's Howard Chaykin working off other people's character designs, maybe even some breakdown art, some storyboarding. It could be. I don't actually know. I don't think the oral history of Marvel Comics doing Star Wars in a comic book has ever been written. I don't think anyone's ever collected the information. So I don't know how many visual guides Marvel had to go on here. Obviously quite a few, because the characters look exactly the same as in the movies. But what were they? What shape did they take? No idea. And this is a Marvel Comics facsimile reprint of Star Wars #1, which I have here somewhere. I didn't know what it was. I was buying comics that week. I didn't know what this was. I had not seen the movie. And I thought, well, I'll definitely give it a try. I mean, comics, this thing, it doesn't say here on this image that I pulled, but this is probably $5 in the comic shops today. This was probably $5. So, but it wasn't then at the time. It wasn't $5 at the time, or the equivalent, adjusting for inflation. It was cheap, so you could take a risk on it. And that is one of the reprint volumes that came out today. That was from Marvel. And DC also has a reprint volume out today. Also a facsimile edition. Also from the 1970s. From 1971. So 71, 77. We're getting closer and closer to the 1980s when all the world made sense. In the 70s, nothing made sense at all. But we all looked so good. We all looked so good that we didn't care. In the 1970s were a time when everybody was starting to imbibe the counterculture vibe of the 60s, only it was starting to become mainstream, it was starting to become commercialized. Your parents were starting to think, well, maybe it's hep to be counterculture, maybe it's hep to listen to what the kids are doing and be cool. And that infected the aforementioned Carmine Infantino and a bunch of other people at DC Comics who thought, are our comics stodgy? Are our comics stodgy? Do they need a shake-up? And naturally, they looked at the big three. They didn't look at the Teen Titans. The Teen Titans have been hep and swinging since the 60s. They looked at the big three. Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. What does Batman say? Well, Alfred, Robin's gone off to college. Aren't we in danger of becoming outmoded? Let's go where the action is, man. Started calling Alfred Alfie. Or Alfie. Oh my God. And the costume was slightly updated, and the methods and modus operandi was slightly updated. Wonder Woman, of course, got the most drastic update of them all, because the DC powers that be routinely care less about her than Batman or Superman, even though she's an absolutely indispensable, iconic figure in superhero comics. So they took Wonder Woman's superpowers away completely and had her be a Diana Rigg-style martial artist. And then there's Superman. What can you do with Superman? Arguably the most stodgy comic book character of them all. He's your dad. He's your high school coach. He's incorruptible. He's invulnerable. There's nothing that can harm him or do anything to him. He always has every situation in hand. What can you do with Superman? Now, later generations of comic book writers would answer that question in a very different way. They would come up with a whole bunch of utterly sacrilegious things to do to Superman, including kill him. But in 1971, the powers that be, the editor and the writer, thought, well, how can we freshen up this character a bit? How can we do that? And they came up with a couple of different ways. None of the ways that would appeal to, that would come to the mind of comic book creators today. But, for instance, Clark Kent is a mild-mannered reporter for a great metropolitan newspaper. Well, what if he weren't? What are newspapers anymore? Everybody watches TV now. They watch what once upon a time in the 70s we referred to as the boob tube. Little did we guess that such a thing as doom scrolling would be able to be possible. Never in a million years. That wasn't even part of dystopian science fiction. That something could have your attention so thoroughly that teenage boys in Japan have died because they could not stop scrolling. They simply starved to death. We called it the boob tube. It was one gigantic piece of furniture in the living room. There were no little boob tubes. You had to go there and watch, and it was just 3 networks. But people were watching more and more of the news. There were still newspaper dispensers on every corner. There were still newsstands everywhere. But newspaper sales were beginning a steady millennial decline. So a couple of the people involved with Superman thought, well, what if Clark Kent were to be a newscaster? I mean, he works for the Daily Planet under Perry White, but what if we introduce some new character who runs a TV show and who buys the Daily Planet or is part of the same entertainment conglomerate and decides to just take Clark Kent and put him on the air? So that would be a big change. Clark Kent would, as he actually wonders in the issue they're going to be looking at, he says, well, what does this mean for the future? Is Superman going to have to wait for commercial breaks? And what's another thing you could do? You can't do much with Superman. What's another thing you could do with him? Now, keep in mind, this was before the very first answer to that question. How can we shake things up with a character? Now, in superhero comic books, the very first answer that every writer and editor has, and the only answer they have, is death. 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 Kill something. Kill lots of things. Back when real adults were running the show, no one thought that. At all. No one thought that. Instead, what can we do to change things? All right, well, Clark Kent has new complications to keeping his secret identity secret, because he's now a broadcaster. He's now anchoring the news. But what else? Well, what's a fundamental aspect of the Superman story? The death of the planet Krypton? No, a supervillain killed it and Jor-El survived. No. Kryptonite. He's vulnerable to kryptonite. Everyone knows that. So what if he weren't? What kind of a story could we wring out of that? And in Superman 233, they decided to tell that story. They got Neil Adams to do a cover of Superman breaking kryptonite chains. It's now an iconic image. And they couldn't do anything with the renumbering. Comic books now, superhero comics renumber from number 1 all the time now, thanks to the collector boom of the 1990s. So that's 30 years ago. It has never resumed. There has never been another collector boom. There never is going to be one again, but the comic book industry cannot get out of that groove. They are still chasing that collector boom. So now they would think nothing of it. But of course, at the time, Superman was on 233, and you don't renumber Superman. But you can use some visual sleight of hand. Neil Adams can certainly do it. So we have this. Kryptonite Nevermore. What's the number you notice on that cover? It isn't this one. It isn't 233. It's this. Number 1 best-selling comics magazine. I don't think that was true when DC did this, but they wanted to have this cover. They wanted something that looked like Superman number 1, the beginning of a new era. And that's what we get. A scientist is doing an experiment on kryptonite, and it goes wrong. There's a chain reaction. Look at this beautiful Kurt Swan artwork. Just incredible. The chain reaction goes wrong. Superman is there to put a lead container over the whole thing. But it goes horribly wrong and blasts Superman away in a wave of kryptonite radiation. He lands flat on the sand, buried in the sand, leaving an impression in the sand. And everybody thinks, well, Superman just got hit face first with a ton of kryptonite, so he's probably dead. But he isn't. Not only is he not dead, but the atomic reaction has changed the chemical composition of kryptonite all over the world. Turned it into harmless iron. There's no more kryptonite in the world. It looks the same as kryptonite, but it isn't anymore. It's chemically inert. It doesn't hurt Superman anymore. What do these scientists say? Could the explosion have affected kryptonite? I wonder, did the rest of the green K on Earth get affected? And it turns out that is true. The Daily Planet runs the story. Kryptonite destroyed. And they're all crowing about it. That is the evil newspaper guy who's decided to steal Clark Kent from Perry White. And Clark Kent has to go out on the job. He has to bring his shoulder-mounted news camera and go out on the job. He's no longer just writing stories for the Daily Planet. He's reporting them. And when he's reporting on this rocket launch, there occurs in this issue one of my all-time favorite visual sequences for Superman anywhere at any time. I fell in love with this in 1971. I have never stopped referring to it. I've never stopped recommending it. And when I saw this issue out today, I had to do it again. I know I've shown you this a million times, but there's some new people here, and I can't help myself anyway. It's my job to be repetitive. My job to be repetitive. Because Clark Kent notices that there is a 2-bit thug who is watching this overgrown candle is set to lift off. He knows there's a thug who's watching the lift off, and he interrupts him. Superman! He's just standing there. He says, how about letting me in on it? And the thug, look at that face. This is when you did faces. This is when you didn't use computer modeling. Sure, Soupy, we're planning to heist the rocket. It ain't carrying no money, but we figure some foreign governments pay plenty for the gadget itself, so they can build their own. I don't mind telling you, 'cause you ain't gonna live long enough to do anything about it. What I got here is the stuff as will zap you permanent. What you call kryptonite. And he's holding kryptonite out of the box there. And Superman is saying, either you haven't seen a paper, or you can't read. And then he says, looks good. Mind if I try some? And eats the kryptonite. Look at that panel. The thug is just standing there astounded as he says, not bad. A trifle stale. Could use a bit of salt. But all in all, a nice little snack. He eats a piece of kryptonite. And then says, oh, and by the way, you're under arrest. I absolutely love that moment. Now, a little later, the rocket that has launched is being interfered with by criminal jets, and Superman has to fly to the rescue. Classic Curt Swan artwork there. He has to fly to the rescue, and he notices that his heat vision isn't as powerful as it used to be. No big deal, though. He can still handle it. He disables the pilots and tows the planes in for landing. For a minute, when he's passing over the desert, where the experiment happened, he feels a little weak, but he recovers right away and keeps going. But we see that he felt weak when he was over the impression that he made in the sand. And the epilogue to the issue is that impression waking up and walking off as a sand version of Superman. A cliffhanger, in other words. And a wrinkle. Something new. Something very interesting when it comes to Superman. That is the main storyline in this issue. This run on Superman had a backup feature on Tales of Krypton, but that is the main storyline, and there's a whole bunch of new energy there. Clark Kent has a new kind of job. There's no kryptonite anymore, but maybe something worse that also makes Superman weak. Delightful Curt Swan artwork, so that not everything is different, not everything is upended. Just wonderful. How wonderful for DC Comics to reprint this, even though it's $5. So I wanted to show you those two things. Those are two things that were in your comic store today. They aren't exactly new issues. They're new releases, but they aren't new issues. But if you went to a comic shop and you had no idea what was good or not, these two things are worth it. These two things are really good. Howard Chaykin artwork, Curt Swan artwork, and lots of fun. So anyway, those are two first issues for your comic books today, and that's just a little comic book extra. I'll wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.